Let's dispense with the standard pleasantries. We are not here today to discuss cloud computing as some benign technological utility. Instead, we are going to deconstruct an invisible, sovereign infrastructure monopoly. As you examine the current dynamics of global capital, you have to understand that Amazon Web Services is no longer just a vendor. It's a digital Leviathan, one that has fundamentally rewritten the very concept of monopoly. My objective in this briefing is to provide you, clinically and entirely without sentiment, the precise architecture of this permanent dependency. We will methodically dissect this entity through 6 distinct vectors. First, the foundational shock. Second, the technical moat. Third, industrial cannibalization. Fourth, the geopolitical sovereign. Fifth, the internal strategic paradox. And we'll conclude with the 2035 equilibrium.
Part 1, the foundational shock.
We have to begin with the thermodynamic reality of Amazon's balance sheet. The public perception of Amazon as this omnipresent global retail storefront is, quite frankly, a carefully maintained illusion. The structural reality is far more predatory. Consider this. AWS accounts for a mere 16% of Amazon's total revenue, yet it consistently generates roughly 60% of the group's consolidated operating income. Take a deliberate moment and let that brutal profit asymmetry sink in. With operating margins hovering near 30%, AWS doesn't function like a service provider. It functions like a sovereign tax authority. Amazon's massive retail logistics arm is effectively a low-margin heat sink. AWS is the high-energy nuclear core that subsidizes that entire retail empire, essentially preventing it from collapsing into insolvency. And this financial asymmetry funds an unprecedented capital expenditure war. Amazon's projected CapEx for 2025 is expected to exceed $75 billion. You need to understand this is not merely an investment. It is a barrier of fire. Technologically, it funds proprietary hypervisors and custom silicon that simply cannot be replicated. Economically, it forces insurmountable economies of scale, leading to asymmetric rent-seeking. And strategically, it ensures that smaller competitors are mathematically locked out of the infrastructure race before the starting gun even fires.
Section 2, the technical moat.
We must examine the barriers of insanity that prevent competitors from actually threatening this dominance. The defining pivot occurred in 2015 with the acquisition of Annapurna Labs. Overnight, AWS ceased being a mere consumer of hardware and transformed into a sovereign semiconductor designer. This vertical integration birthed the Graviton CPU architecture, and subsequently the Trainium and Inferentia chips tailored for artificial intelligence. They completely eliminated the middleman. Let's expand on the implications of this proprietary silicon across 3 critical layers. Technologically, AWS decoupled itself from the traditional x86 architecture. They severed the dependency on Intel and AMD. Economically, by owning the silicon layer itself, they achieve a 40% improvement in price performance. That makes it mathematically impossible for any newcomer reliant on the broader supply chain to compete on pure cost. And geopolitically, Amazon has effectively localized the semiconductor supply chain entirely within the fortified walls of its own data centers.
Section 3, industrial cannibalization.
Let's address the second-order implications of this market dominance. AWS operates on what is essentially a Hotel California economic model. Data checks in, but it can never leave without causing total financial ruin. Let's break down this calculus of captivity. Technologically, through specific services like the Nitro hypervisor and Lambda serverless architecture, a company permanently marries its core logic to Amazon's proprietary ecosystem. Economically, attempting to extract that data invokes prohibitive egress fees and triggers multi-million-dollar refactoring debt. Strategically, this creates a phenomenon we call data gravity. The more efficient your system becomes on AWS, the more impossible it is to ever leave. The $0 ingress strategy lures your capital in, but the underlying architecture traps it. Consider the deep strategic irony of the Netflix paradox. Retail giants and streaming platforms face a brutal competitor's dilemma. Do you use an inferior tech stack and risk losing market share? Or do you use the world's best infrastructure and directly fund your greatest rival? Netflix is essentially paying for the very servers that Amazon uses to build Prime Video. It's a brilliantly Machiavellian co-opetition model. Just pause and consider the sheer intellectual humiliation of a corporation paying direct tribute to the very entity actively trying to destroy its core business. The enforcement mechanism for this subjugation is the egress fee. It acts as a strict, unforgiving financial border control. To gain the supposed operational efficiency of the cloud, a CEO must completely surrender their company's exit sovereignty.
It is an inescapable digital exit tax that enforces a state of permanent technological vassalage.
Section 4. The Geopolitical Sovereign.
We now escalate our analysis from mere corporate strategy to the level of state sovereignty. AWS is no longer a commercial vendor. It is the digital territory upon which modern statehood is built. The 2013 CIA contract, followed by the Department of Defense Joint Warfighting Cloud capability, solidified AWS as a non-state actor and the architect of national security. Technologically, they are processing drone telemetry and running nuclear command simulations. Economically, they have captured the most irreversible capital in the world: government defense budgets. Geopolitically, they operate their data centers as digital embassies, literally housing the national health systems and core databases of foreign nations. Make no mistake, if a localized blackout occurs at AWS today, it means partially blinding the United States intelligence apparatus.
And because a vast majority of global startups and unicorns operate exclusively on this infrastructure, Amazon possesses an unparalleled intelligence asymmetry. They hold what we call the God view. Amazon doesn't require focus groups or market research. They can simply watch the server loads of every emerging AI unicorn spike in real time. Technologically, they monitor the heartbeat of global innovation. Economically, they recognize competitive threats instantly. Strategically, they identify acquisition targets before those competitors even realize they have a viable product.
Section 5. The Internal Strategic Paradox. To truly understand how this unbreakable system was forged, we must shift our focus from external market dominance to internal corporate brutality. AWS was not born from some visionary, customer-centric desire to change the world. That is marketing. It was a desperate internal survival mechanism. In the early 2000s, Amazon's monolithic architecture was fundamentally failing under its own weight. This prompted the 2002 Bezos mandate, which was an act of radical corporate Darwinism. Teams were forced to communicate solely via APIs or face immediate termination. AWS was born purely from a CEO's visceral intolerance for internal friction. This ruthless mandate forced Amazon to treat its own internal departments as external, untrusted customers. It created a deeply paranoid, zero-trust architecture built by engineers who were actively forced to treat their own colleagues as hostile entities. But ironically, this exact paranoia is what makes the modern AWS hypervisor infrastructure so modular, highly scalable, and virtually unbreakable today. They essentially productized their own operational trauma, packaged it, and sold it to the world.
Section 6. The 2035 Equilibrium. Finally, we must project this trajectory forward to the impending AI age. Observe the distinct path dependency of AWS. They evolved from a simple retail storefront to a global IT reseller to what they are undeniably becoming right now, a sovereign AI refinery. With proprietary chips like Trainium and Inferentia, AWS is positioning itself not just to participate in the artificial intelligence revolution, but to ruthlessly tax the entirety of it. They don't need to pick the winning AI model. They simply own the refinery where all the data must be processed. The most powerful company in the world is the one that becomes entirely invisible, capturing the cash flow of the global corporate landscape as an automatic, unavoidable tax.
Which leaves us with a necessary clinical interrogation. If your greatest corporate rival owns the vault where your data is stored, the cryptographic key required to access it, and the very silicon that processes your every transaction, are you truly an independent business, or are you merely a tenant on Amazon's digital plantation? The greatest monopoly is the one you cannot see, and the one you simply cannot afford to stop paying. I urge you to consider this dynamic carefully as you allocate capital and architect your own strategic future.